Welcome to the Modern Pet Retailer, where independent pet retailers come together to run better businesses, make smarter decisions, and stop leaving money on the table. Welcome to the Modern Pet Retailer. This week we're talking about all things SOPs inside your business. Most independent retailers and small businesses have their processes living in one place, and that's their head or their longest standing employee's head. This is what's called a single point of failure. Every time someone starts new, every time a key employee is out sick, every time you want to take a day off, the lack of documentation costs you time, money, and consistency. An SOP is not a corporate thing. It is a protection system for your customers, your team, and your time, and they're important to have in your business. So if you have a dusty binder that's not been used in years and we need to dust that thing off and update the processes in it, or if we have a Google Drive we need to start building, we're going to start that today. So let's talk about why documentation matters. The stores that scale, whether scaling to you is staying in your own one single store, but you want to step out of your business, or scaling to you means you want to create a bunch of little businesses and franchise. Scaling means a lot to different people, but for this purpose, you can't do either of those things unless you can instill these SOPs in your business and somebody can just walk in and run your business without you in it. Every time a task is done differently, depending on who is working, you're paying a hidden cost in customer experience, inconsistencies, training, correction time, in your own mental load. If you could just get these processes out of your head and documented, it takes a huge stressor off of your life. And I'm sure a lot of us have had that long-standing employee that has left, and they are the ones that did a lot of different tasks. And they had their way of doing it, and it might have not been your way of doing it, but it was done in the best way they could. And they leave, and then nobody picks up that task. These SOPs will just help make sure that these tasks get picked up by the next person and that anybody can step in and do it when that person's not there. The goal of SOPs is just to take your institutional knowledge and move it into people's heads and into a system that the whole store can access and rely on. So a real example of this in our store is before we had an SOP on how to do our dog wash, every employee cleaned it differently. And none of it was done to the standard of which we wanted. Everybody thought, this is clean. This is what I perceive as clean. This is what I perceive as looks. And it wasn't done to what we call our 5-star standards. Some people miss SEPs. Some use the wrong products like cleaning solutions. Some had their own shortcuts, which was very annoying and hard to overcome. But all of that was our fault for not having an SOP in place that explained exactly how we wanted to do it every single time. So once we documented that process with photos, step-by-step instructions, we also stated the intent. So when you read the SOP, you know exactly what task you're about to perform and why it's so important that it be done in this particular way, because it helps employees resonate with why they're reading it, why it needs to be done that way. Because if you just tell them it needs to be done the 5-star way, and the results became inconsistent and regardless of who was on shift. So Dave, you have talked about institutional knowledge versus personal and proprietary knowledge. Can you speak to what happens to a business that never makes the shift, where everything's in a person's head or the owner's head and never gets it on paper?
Yeah, and especially when you use the example of our bath setup. Early on, as we had the bath done, we actually had one employee who had worked in a different location that had baths, and she was very good at understanding what had to be done, and she would do things her way. And to some degree, she owned area. And to us, it was like easy, like, oh, okay, she can do it. She can train other people, and that worked. So we took the easy way out, and that lasted for a little while. She moved on to a different job. So she took a lot of that information with her, and the results kind of went downhill because she owned it, she supervised it, she helped to train the people that were coming behind her. But that's what I would call personal knowledge or proprietary knowledge that lives in one person's head, whether it's the owner or a particular employee who's just taken responsibility for a particular part of your business. And the proprietary knowledge leads key man risk. It leads to disruptions in business when the person leaves or stops training other people. And you mentioned the other part of it. Even if that person trains other people, not everybody gets it the same way. So we want to shift always from individual knowledge, personal knowledge, proprietary knowledge over to call institutional knowledge, which is simply an SOP, a clear guideline and a step-by-step that you can discuss, you can refine, everything's on the table. So this has become something that you can move towards better and better. So if three people do the job differently, you can come to an agreement on, out of those three, what gives you the best end result. You make that your standard. So it is important for your business to move from the owner's proprietary knowledge or somebody who's been there for many years and their individual knowledge and their process. You basically try to take best practices across your business that are owned by individuals and make them into a system that the whole company can use and everybody can learn from. So it's just so important to move from that one person knowledge to institutional knowledge. It speeds things up. It gives you the opportunity to improve. And, it's the old hit by a bus, right? The person who owns that knowledge leaves, gets another job, gets hit by a bus, you don't have to worry about scrambling to figure out or, dropping some of the steps because nobody was with it. So important to get to move that direction, to get into that institutional systemized knowledge.
Yeah, and I like what you said about you have three different employees that do the same task, and one does step X really well, step 2 really well, and step 3. You can build these SOPs by committee as long as it's to your standard at the end of the day. So definitely reach out to your team if you have somebody that's like, so-and-so really nails this, and then we can use process that employee 2 does to pick up the slack and make a whole kind of team SOP. But what I want you to ask yourself is, what's one process in your store right now that only works if one person's doing it? That could be a good trigger to let you know that might be one you need to hit first, because if that employee's, then that task is just not being done correctly or done at all, which could be the worst case scenario. So you're probably thinking of all the different things you do on a daily basis, all the different tasks your employees have on a regular basis, and feeling a little overwhelmed on how to prioritize these and which ones to document first. The good news is we can do like a simple checklist with a prioritization framework to find out which ones you need to focus on first. If you want to focus on ones that, let's say you're the biggest key man risk to your own business as the owner or your manager is, you could start with those first, because if, again, they get hit by a bus and tomorrow the store could possibly stop operating altogether. So you can prioritize those first. The tasks that are most common for mistakes, you can build SOPs around those first. We call our break glass scenario. So the power goes out, the internet goes down, things that make your business come to a screeching halt. Definitely get those written down, and the troubleshooting processes so that anybody can just step in and know how to hit the backup generator if you're lucky enough to have one of those, or how to call the proper channels to get certain things fixed, like your internet or the electricity. So what you could use as a framework could be high frequency, high consequence, like we just talked about. Definitely document these first tasks that are done or tasks that if they are not done, the business just stops. So some examples would be like opening and closing procedures. So if you're not here to open the doors, somebody read it and get things opened and operating for you. Register operations is a big one, getting some of the troubleshooting SOPs down for that. Customer greeting standards. For us, like dog washing, we do 400 baths a month, something that we had to get nailed down. Otherwise, we have inconsistent results. The second stage could be high frequency, low consequence to document second. So daily tasks where if they didn't get done, that after a while they would stack up and start becoming damaging. So a good example would be like shelf restocking procedures, product receiving, cleaning routines, something that if you stopped doing it today or you didn't have anybody doing it today, it'd start to get dusty and wouldn't look right. But at the end of 7 days, it's going to start looking like a hot mess and be of higher urgency. you can prioritize these second. On the bottom tier, and the next prioritization would be low frequency, high consequence. Again, those are your rare scenarios, I would call them, like handling an injured animal in the store. So if somebody comes in and their dog gets into a fight, ideally I hope that doesn't happen very often, but having a process written out for that so that anybody can step in and make sure that's handled appropriately. Process of vendor return, like if you have product that needs to be returned from a customer or damage from a shipment, and managing customer complaints and escalation. And then the final tier would be your low frequency, low consequence. They come up very rarely and they usually don't cause too much of a problem. So do not waste time writing SOPs for things to happen and don't matter as much when they do. I believe Dave calls this, don't create a rule if you don't have to. What is your exact statement you like to say?
The number one rule of rule making is don't make a rule you don't have to make, or don't make a rule for the 1%.
Yeah, definitely falls into this. So you might need some, but this would be where those fall, of kind of just sweeping up everything that needs to be swept up. And Dave, when you look at a store and you're trying to figure out where to start, what is the first question you ask to identify which process needs to be documented most urgently?
When I look at your list, it's, you write high frequency, high consequence. These are the things that are on a really consistent basis and have a high impact if they're not done. And you could look at like high frequency, low consequence, and low frequency, high consequence as, what is the likelihood at any given time? I was thinking the example of high frequency, low consequence as you were talking about it. I think a good visual is not taking the trash out, right? So, I mean, you had a good example about dusting, but I think we can really picture what would happen if no one took the trash out. It would just pile up and it would become a mess. It would stink. It would really not present your business the way you want. The low frequency high is you really have to balance the risk and likelihood of occurrence against the consequence. You also mentioned like power out. We know that this might happen. I don't even think once a year, but the consequences you're gonna lose business that day. So you really have to balance, like, are you in summer storm time and you have a higher likelihood of power going out? Well, you might want to bump that to the top of the list. But I like your prioritization. I think it's really relevant to almost all businesses to use that series of questions to make sure that you're prioritizing properly. When I look at the things that you would want to ask questions about for prioritization is, if you think about these high consequence, I think a cascading effect is something you want to ask. So a simple one is mis-selling canned food. And this just, hey, we're in retail, right? You've got a bunch of people selling, and the highest risk of sale, customer packs stuff in a box that you don't know it's different stuff, and your checkout person doesn't check. So they sell 12 cans, but they happen to be 12 different cans. So it has a cascading effect of now multiple items are off inventory, and causes ordering problems, and that causes customer service problems. And this is a cascading effect that has 3 or 4 or 5 consequences tied to one initial action. So both the writing of the SOP and the enforcement of the SOP becomes very, very important, even for simple stuff. But to Tiff's point, you may not think inventory has a high consequence, but when they cascade into multiple different issues, it becomes a high consequence. Especially like us, if you believe that inventory is the lifeblood, right? They say cash flow is the lifeblood of business. Inventory is where cash flow. So if you're off inventory, that causes some big problem. And I think another area you look at is problems that don't have there's a non-obvious root cause. And something I was thinking about when you're talking about bath cleaning is But because dog baths are so terrible on dog hair and stuff that goes drain, we have a triple redundant drain filter, so that we don't get a whole lot of clogs going on. And honestly, we've gone years without clogs because of the way we set it up. But from a customer's perspective, if the drain is not running, they may disrupt that process. So if our employees are not trained to maintain the drain system between every bath and every single day, then a problem can occur at the customer service level, the customer experience level, that has a non-obvious root cause. They didn't realize that when they didn't clean the third filter, it starts to accumulate blockage. It backs up in the tub, thinks it's just the top screen, and they either wipe the hair away from that, or we've had a lot of customers, we're not training them, and they just respond by pulling the top filter off. So this causes another cascading, or sort of like they're solving one simple problem, actually not solving, we're not working towards a problem. So these are things that are important that I would move to high priority, because when either of these types of issues go wrong, either cascading effect or non-obvious root cause, they get left alone. They just become worse over time, and then they can get out of control pretty quickly. That's where I look at what you want to focus on for your top hits, your first runs, and just getting them done so that you have at least a small group of employees who begin to understand, refine these processes, train other. That's where I focus for priority.
Yeah, so if you had to pick one process in your store that causes the most inconsistency or the most callbacks and corrections, what would that be? And you probably have something that popped in your head pretty quickly. If I think of like when I'm at a trade show or I'm off site and I just get a call, they're like, how do we do this again? I'll be like, I'm writing this up as soon as I get back, 'cause this doesn't warrant a call, because it's something that might be easy. I just have to do the right thing and articulate it and write it down so they can find it and have that information. And another bad habit I have is when I write SOPs, I write them as if I'm reading them, and I make sense to me. So I need to learn how to write them that any Joe Schmo can come in and read and understand, not using individual knowledge language, not starting at steps where I'm like, oh, they get the first ABC. They just need me to start at D on the steps. We have to write so that people will understand them and actually read them and use them.
I was just thinking, as a real life example, you and I were at a show and sitting at the lunch table from a pet business owner who was taking phone calls, answering the most sort of like straightforward questions to her employees while we sat there. And the amazing thing is, it doesn't take much to do these. And once you do them and you sort of like live outside the bubble of the day to day, you immediately realize what the value is. But when you're fighting the day to day, you probably don't even realize it. And then you go to a show and you go, I can't believe this person who's here at a show offsite doing important stuff, like getting deals and buying new inventory, is getting calls about how to handle a customer interaction. And you have to get outside of the bubble to really begin to understand the value of doing these SOPs. And this is a good point, is like, you don't want these phone calls. And I think you're right about bumping those things to priority. Why are they calling you when they shouldn't? We assume it's easy enough that they should be able to do it themselves and not have to call us if we have a good system in place.
Yeah, so the anatomy of a good SOP is, we're going to start with the title. It's going to be clear and very specific. It's not going to be cleaning, but it's going to be dog wash, cleaning procedure. It's just going to be like cleaning tasks or something generic. We're going to show the intent, because this is going to help the reader know why they want to align with this SOP, why they want to do it exactly as it's written, and what the importances are. What if it goes wrong, if it's not done correctly, what are some of the fallouts, like Dave said, with the baths and the three-party system of the screens? Like, if you remove that front screen, what problem does that cause down the road? And vice versa, if you don't clean the third hair trap system, that will eventually lead to frustration on the customer's part, because they have an overflowing bath. People will follow a process much more reliably when they understand the reason behind it and the different fallouts of what happens if you do not follow it. Understanding who owns it, which role is completing the task. So we'll use a warehouse example. So like a receiving SOP that's basically on the warehouse person. That it states this is for warehouse staff to help receive product or whatever it is. It tells who is it for. But you might have another SOP that's based out of the warehouse that can be completed by front. So you want to make sure that front staff read that one and think they're completing the SOP for the other task. They need to be clear of who's supposed to be reading it and why they're reading it. When it happens is huge. So daily, weekly, after each use, at those specific keywords so they know when to have it completed. And step-by-step instructions that are written at the level of someone who has never done it before. Be more specific than you think you need to be. And if it needs to be done in a specific order, number the steps. If a step requires a judgment call, describe what that looks like. You can do a decision matrix or decision tree for those kinds of things. We'll go back to the bath example. If the bath is backed up, check X first. If that's not done, check this. Or if it's showing that this is clear, what's the next decision they can make? Help them make those judgment calls so they don't have to come with you and say, hey, I checked step 1, but it didn't work. But did you check the other things that could be? We need to have those written down. Power outages is a complicated one, but understanding what do you need to check when the power is out first. Go and call your service provider. All the different steps you need to take before that. Using visual aids is very helpful, especially on those ones that can be hard. For our bath SOP, we have how we like our towels rolled up because we like them very specific, but 2 in words is complicated. But if you just show somebody a picture of it, it looks very clean and easier to understand when it's accompanied by diagrams or dialogue. If this is a task that has to be signed off by your team lead, just making sure that it says, hey, confirm closing person that these tasks are good to go, or confirm that this task is completed if you have that kind of secondhand backup.
I like the way that you've laid this list out. One thing I would look at is it should be, in order to refine it to a very useful SOP, is the mid-step, the step-by-step instructions should be a balance between completeness and conciseness, right? So what do I mean by that? If the document is too long, functionally, it will not be used. It's just not going to be used. So we want clarity, we step by step. But if we make this into a 3 and 4 page document, it will never, ever, ever, ever be used. So the answer is, are you too verbose? Or should you break it down into multiple subtasks, especially if there's a decision, right? So just understand that refinement to be clear but concise is an important long-term step. Doesn't have to be your first step. Get these things done, get them in place, get employees' feedback on them. But always refine to the least amount of words to get the job done consistently with your most novice employees.
And Dave, if you were writing this and you were reading a store's SOPs and they were vague languaging, what would that kind of look like for you? How would you tell them to fix it?
Yeah, definitely. And that goes back to the step-by-step. Vague language is maybe comes from the expert with too high level of a view. And you're like, oh, it just makes sense. Clean the bath thoroughly, because you know exactly what that means, but it doesn't tell the novice what you mean. So, the step-by-step is, wipe all the surfaces with particular type of cloth, or use a particular type of solution that you've decided is effectively for cleaning the bath and germ free and leave it smelling nice. So this is something that we have done it a million times. We tend to move towards generalizations that we understand, but we need to provide enough detail, again, for this first dayer, for this novice, for first experienced people to go in and get the job done satisfactorily. So we can't just say, go do X or do X well. What does that mean? Bring the trash out to the dumpster and put it in and close the lid when you're finished. Okay. that's pretty explicit. And this is really the way that you have to think. Uh, and to contradict what I just said about being too verbose, I think it's okay to start with excessive language to over explain things and then refine back to minimum necessary explanation. But this detailed explanation is really what's the document functional for the greatest number of employees who will be going through it and reading it in order to give you a consistent and satisfactory outcome that way. So stay away from those generalizations, sort of high level thinking, vague terms and words.
Yeah. And if you find yourself using vague terms that maybe you only can understand, you can use large language model AIs to help you articulate this, get outside your own voice. So if you give it an SOP that you wrote, and let's say it uses vague or it uses maybe a step you're not thinking about, you can give that to Claude or ChatGPT and say, hey, ask me any questions if you think it's not clearly articulated well, or if you think there's any steps in the process. And sometimes this can help you be like, oh, I didn't even realize I needed to tell people where the cleaning products were. But ChatGPT can help remind you like, hey, where do I even get the clean the bath? Those weird, simple steps that you don't think about as you're doing a task because you have the knowledge of where that stuff is. You don't think you have to articulate it to a new person. So that it can help generate ideas of steps you might need to include and then help you with that languaging to get it as precise as possible that an AI can come in and physically do your job for you.
I don't know if you're finished with the AI, but I also like, well, first of all, if you get Claude, your Grok, your OpenAI, ChatGPT to go clean the baths for you, please let me know because, we'll take that one. As soon as he crosses into the physical world, we're in trouble and very, very happy at the same time. This is also a good point, is asking the LLM to ask us questions until you understand it, and it will keep prompting. But conversely, we can use the LLM for the step I was talking about before, is start verbose, give it the whole SOP, and say, hey, can you make this tighter, cleaner, and more concise while we're keeping all of the steps necessary? And you might have to run a few times, but I agree. These LLMs are really a great place to, as Tiff said, get out of your own mind, get out of your own headspace, and offer it to something that's more of a generalist that doesn't understand the specific details of what we're trying to convey. So excellent tool to use to build out your SOPs.
Yeah, and if you're a store that already has a lot of your SOPs in place, and let's say you have them all nicely stored in like a Google Drive or a online document folder holder, you can give them back to AI to make them consistent for you. We're a store that's been around for 80-something years, and when I first got here, there were probably 6 hands involved in the SOP writing, and you could tell you'd open one document, it was a little bit different, like either the bulleting points or everything. And some things like might not matter to you, like for aesthetic purposes. But if you have steps written out and then arrows in one SOP and then bullets in the other, and a new employee reads 2 on the same exact day, and they're like, okay, the bullet means this is a task and the numbers mean it's a step kind of thing. Like it just leaves it open for interpretation of, are these mandatory? Are these things I should check in this exact moment of the step, or is something I should just look out for? So if you have a consistency within all of your documentation, it helps make it clearer on the end user to know. And that's still a work in progress for us. We find documents all the time. They're like, oops, shoot, this one hasn't gone through our little SOP reader for AI and needs to be put in because it's not formatted consistently. So that's another way that AI can help you create like a lot more clear content. So once you have a template that you like and you articulated it clearly to an AI, you can use that over and over again and build your persona around, hey, take this SOP and make sure it fits this template, whatever that looks for you. Be different, but as long as it's clear, concise, and consistent. But that will help that consistency by just giving it back to the AI. You mentioned adding intent to SOPs in our training episode, and it really stuck with me. Can you explain again why that one section changes how people follow the process?
Yeah, a lot of document, if it's just a step by step, it's a what or a how. What are you doing? How are you doing it? And, who's going to do it? So these are all sort of like the basic questions that we're looking at. The intent is the why. And really, it's the reason we're doing it in the first place. If you're going to clean the bathroom, you can just explain literally steps. Okay, wipe down the mirror, clean the toilet, clean the sink, mop the floor. And that's fine. And you give them the how, you give them the tools. These are the cleaners you're going to use. These are the tools you're going to use. But the why elevates one level above, and it creates a purpose, an intent, a reason. Something about the bathroom could be, you as a store, we want to maintain clean bathrooms to present a professional and clean atmosphere for our customers and employees to use. And the intent kind of escapes some of the what and how. Because, for instance, what if you're out of a particular, does they just stop cleaning the bathroom? Or if they know the intent, and the intent is to have a professional presentation to customers, and it gives them a little bit of flexibility, even if the rest of the system has some breakdown in it. Something's missing, a step can't be done, a tool can't be found, isn't available right now. It doesn't mean stop what you're doing and sit in the corner and cry. It means let's finish the task to our best ability in order to achieve this outcome. So the intent just goes beyond the details and gives us a purpose and reason and a desired outcome that once we produce that result, have a better operation, we have a better store, we have a better customer service experience. As a matter of fact, we have a better employee experience, right? So we're not just doing these tasks, get the tasks done. We're doing these tasks for a particular reason. And the intent is to articulate that reason and the broader of the desired outcome and why we want that outcome accomplished in the way that we do. I do believe that intent is very important for two reasons. I think people work better when they understand the why. And if they understand the final desired outcome, the intent of the process, they are capable of completing it, even if some of this can't be in the way that you explained.
As someone that's worked primarily in my professional career with small businesses, I definitely know that when you don't have these SOPs in place or the intent in place of the SOP, it's very hard on employees to resonate with the place they're working with and not get frustrated, not have to feel like they have to ask the same question 50 times because they just can't remember how it's done or anything like that. So it's a point of contention when you have a staff that just doesn't have a clear picture of what winning looks like. And that's what the SOP is helping us with. You just have to remember an SOP without intent is just a list of rules. An SOP with an intent is a set of principles your team can apply even when it's slightly different from what you documented. So if the intent of our bath SOP makes sure that our customers have a 5-star experience and who needs to provide that experience, you can know that if they have a weird, muddy situation that gets a little out of hand, it still has to look by this kind of principle instead of, well, it didn't tell me how to do that part, so I just don't clean that part, or whatever the case is. So has anyone tried writing an SOP that had it ignored or misunderstood? What do you think that gap was with your staff? When I first got here, there was a binder underneath the cash register that had some SOPs in it, and it was quite dusty binder, and I don't think people knew where it was, and I wasn't showed it. I had discovered it later. But having it in the wrong place or someplace easily to find, and then also updated if it is a hard copy, just self-reflect on why the SOP might have not been followed or ignored, or maybe they didn't attempt to search for it. Because if you write it down and you still get a call about it, something's still missing. So we have to figure out what that is. So we're writing all these SOPs and we're talking about staff buy-in. We got to get them to read it. We have to get them to use it. And how do we get them to do that? The fastest way your SOPs get ignored is to write them without the people who do the tasks. Most SOPs failed not because they are poorly written, but because people expected to follow had no input in creating them. So we talked about how we came up with our bath SOP. We took our 3 best people when we were like, I really like how the baths look after so-and-so gets out of there. Let's ask them what they do differently or what details they look at that make it so it looks the way it does when they come out. And we took these 3 top performers and we made this document that some persuasion, like one person was just like, I think we should do it this way. One person said, we think we should do it this way. But we came up with a compromise. And basically, we have this beautiful SOP.
I think it also allows you to have a standard to coach against, right? You talked about training, and about buy-in. But the SOP becomes the standard, which you can both train with, but also coach against. And this is also very, very important because when things are vague, when things are not written down, you can't really coach against something that may not have been taught clearly. SOP gives you that base to teach clearly and then to coach toward with new employees who might not get it first run, second run.
It makes training so much easier and then gives you clear guidance if you have to do recoaching or anything. This is how it was articulated to you. We're going to re-articulate it exactly the same way. Like I said, we could ask experienced staff to help us create these SOPs so that they feel like they're contributing. It also helps that experienced staff when they go to train new employees. They're like, I know the backbone of this document is how build. It helps them articulate it a little bit clearer. Asking your newest staff what's confusing when they first learned a task can help you refine SOPs, which is also another step we put into the bath SOP, which I'll use as the most prime example, is after it's still not getting done correctly after we taught it via the SOP, we had a staff member that said, I actually don't think this was articulated in here. What happens when we do this? Or I don't know what happens when this scenario comes up. Then we can go back to the SOP and be like, actually, it's not in, and we can put it in there. It's covered if it's something that happens frequently enough. At least use language that it would encompass that if you don't want to have a specific written out statement for something very niche or very one-time offish. Your longest standing employees are your biggest SOP asset and your biggest SOP risk. They have the most knowledge, but they are also the resist documentation because it can feel like you're questioning them or how they do things. Or when you SOPs in place and you have these legacy employees that might not be performing it to your standard, and it's not on their fault that they weren't performing it to your standard because you did not have these in place until now, you can have a lot of pushback. So frame it as capturing their expertise and not replacing it. We want to make sure that the way they do lives in the system so we never lose it. It can be intimidating if you say, hey, I need you to tell me and articulate how you do your job so that just in case something happens to you, have somebody else do it. We're not being replaced. You're not fired or let go for any reason. We just need to have this document in place just in case. And Dave, you've talked about the tension between experienced employees who have their own way of things and the need of consistent standards. How do you navigate that without damaging the relationship?
First, I like the idea of asking someone who's been around a very long time to document their job or what they do does give you often an immediate defensiveness, like, what's going on? Am I getting fired? Why do you need to know this? Are you going to be like scrutinizing everything I do? Which we got in the past for, hey, tell me how you're doing this. And then it's like, well, why? Are you going to be looking over my shoulder? Well, yeah, we want to look at the process and we want to be able to share that with other people. But I think one of the biggest issues in people that have been with and done particular jobs within 3 years that maybe you don't even know as well as they do because they do their job well. So you start to ignore it. That's totally fine. You're focused on other stuff. But what can happen is that as we get better as humans, as our key employees get better, we start to reduce the way that we see things. They say master chess players will understand chunks of moves in the tens of moves at a time. They'll see 10 moves with the expectation of how people will counter, and they'll see all these chunks as one process. We do the same thing. Our most experienced employees will not easily articulate every single step because it's become subconscious, even know exactly what they're doing. And it's actually quite difficult to extract that. And I think this becomes part of the problem, part of the tension. One, you've put them on the spot. Tell me what you're doing, how you're doing it. And there's sort of defensiveness and some concern. And I think, as Tiff, a lot of it is, how do you bring this up? We're mining you for expertise because we appreciate the way that you're doing this. And we want to make sure anybody else that does it will do it to the same standard that you've created. That you're important to us. The way that you do the job is appreciated. And we want to make sure more people can do it at the same level of skill that you're doing it. But then you get into the nuts and bolts of it and you say, hey, this thing that you've been doing for 5 or 10 years, how exactly, detail by detail, do you do it? They will not be able to explain it. And I think that's it's a little personally frustrating when you have to ask, oh yeah, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And they're like, I don't know. I just jump in front of the computer and, you'll notice, like, first of all, they'll say things really you can't even record. Well, you hit this step, you do that step, you do go over here, and then you do that. And you're like, hang on, I'm still on step 2 and you're on step 5. That's how you know, like, they've gotten so good at that job that they forget half of the steps, or they say it so quickly that you can't even record it. So I think those tensions come in those two flavors, right? The initial defensiveness, because they believe that you're going to be looking over their shoulder, and they have a concern about why do you want this information? So the way that you bring it up is going to be really, really important. And then 2, I think, is a personal frustration when we try to explain something and they don't understand it. So from an expert's point of view, if they're not accustomed to teaching or coaching or explaining, they'll just chunk so much information and drop 5 or 6 steps as if it's one step. So it's personally frustrating to them to have to slow down and have to dig out every single step. And this is natural as we get better stuff to begin to forget all of the steps. It's important for us to do. It's just frustrating to have to go backwards. One of my children was very, very good at math, and in the younger elementary school age, the math class would say, well, your work, every step in the work. And he was like, I don't know. I just know the answer. It's like, it was difficult for him to go back and slow articulate every single step because he just happened to be good at math and he was able to do math in his head, but was not able to explain the steps, even though he was doing it properly. And this is the type of frustration that you'll be loading on people that have been around for. Just be sensitive to those two things that can create tension and can create concern, and explain the real reason behind it is to be able to take high quality expertise that the employee has and help more employees do the job as well as they do over time.
Another fear they might have, and it's definitely a legitimate fear, is if you document the process of which they do and you find redundancies or steps that are not necessary, or maybe something's changed and that step's no longer necessary, and you cut down the time it takes to perform that task, you have the job loss, whether it's just task loss or a whole position removed. Next week, when we talk about analyzing systems within our business, we're going to talk about our warehouse system and how we severely cut that down. The job looks completely different than it did 2 years ago. So I could definitely see fear from a legacy employee that's like, I've done this task. This is my task. I've always done it. If I articulate it to you and you find out that it doesn't take that much time, or I could do it faster, or technology's changed since you probably learned how to do that task, if you've been there long enough, things might have changed. So it can be to let them into that world and be like, I like how I do it. I like the steps I take, whether they're redundant or not. So I could definitely see getting pushback from that perspective. But as a business owner, as somebody that's in charge of an entire place that has to operate as efficiently as possible, you can't hold back doing that at the cost of one employee. Because if you can improve business time and money in an area, you have 15 people employed instead of just the one person employed. Not that one process is probably going to put you out of business, but if you do that across multiple different areas, you could be saving to have your business operate longer and be more successful over time.
Yeah, and I think always the fear of, like you said, people losing their job. And I think we have to think about, if we are able to refine, to remove steps, to use technology in place of human capital, it doesn't mean we're getting rid of employees. The employee has a skill set that can grow. We all have a task list way longer than we can ever do. We just think about, okay, how do we move them into a different job position, doing different work that is still very valuable to the business? But you're absolutely right. Just seeing changes in a business can elicit fear, especially to people who don't particularly like change. And they could be in fear for their job, either legitimately or, again, possibly reducing their current task load and shifting job to different things that would be more valuable to the business today, just because you don't have the bandwidth in. So that go both ways, but I can certainly understand what you're saying about it being generating fear in an employee who's been doing a job a particular way for a long time, and you kind of like digging at, we're going to change this. We're going to make it easier and more efficient.
Yeah, an important thing to remember that SOPs built with the team are followed by the team. SOPs handed down to the team get filed or forgotten. So it's best to bring them in on these building processes. So I kind of earlier that there was a binder here that had a bunch of dust on it. And I want to talk a little bit about where to store and how to share these SOPs so that and different things you can use throughout your store to help improve the consistency of used. So a great SOP that nobody can find is the same as no SOP at all. The storage system has to match your team and how it actually works, not how you wish they worked. So if you operate primarily in Google and Google Business and Google Drive, building it there, easy, searchable, shareable, updatable in real time. Or if you use Notion or any project management apps, communication, building it into that system so you can find it easily and that they're native and familiar with. Printed binder is like my least favorite thing just because paper is just icky. A good example of why you might need a printed binder is having your SOP if the power goes out. If you don't have access to the SOPs on a phone, that's something digital that might have power, you might need, in case of the power goes out, written down somewhere so that you can find it when you can't get to a computer. Using QR codes, your store. So if you have certain cleaning products in a closet and you need a little cheat sheet of, hey, this green one is for this blue one is for this, you can use codes to take people as they're standing in front of it directly to the SOP that you want them to read. Some of the more like that bath SOP, some things that are a little bit harder to memorize up front, so the steps in front of you. We keep quick links in our employee newsletter so that if we have a new employee starting, they can easily access it and be like, okay, I need a refresher real quick because there's a lot of steps within this task. And it takes a while to memorize it, takes a while to build the muscle memory and doing it the correct way. Whatever system you choose, the rule is basically one place, ideally. Not some binder, and then some of them in Google Docs, and then some of them in email, and some of them in chat. One place that everyone knows about and can access. The best storage system is the one your team will actually use, and simple beats sophistication every single time. The last thing we're going to cover with SOPs is keeping them dynamic and not static. I mentioned earlier, we've been around for something years, so a lot of the SOPs that we find that are older documents and we either need to remove them or because the way we do it has changed. An SOP written once and never touched again is already becoming outdated because the way technology moves or the way you change your processes in your store, or you could change the way you do one system in one place and it affects 3 other SOPs on the back end that need to be updated. A process changes, a new product, a new equipment, new system. The SOP needs to reflect it. Every time someone finds a faster or better, it should go through a review before becoming the new standard, just quietly become the way one person does it. So if you have employees that are like, hey, I was reading through document the other day and I noticed when I do it this way, it's done faster, it's done better, having employees able to update it based off of your standards. You can build a feedback loop. So like training milestones, we have a form for new employees to say, hey, I learned this today and something wasn't clear. Now that could be on the trainee or it could be on the SOP, but it helps us open the door to that conversation and be like, okay, what was unclear? What can we change? What fix? So like we use Google Forms for that. We use Google Forms for a lot of things. So if an employee is doing a task and they're like, hey, I noticed we don't stock this type of thing anymore. Is this step relevant? They can point that stuff out. When an SOP gets updated, everyone who uses it knows it changed and why. So using some kind of note system, if you use Google Drive and Google Docs, you can put literally comments that are time-stamped on them. Like, hey, we updated this. Just making sure that the entire team is aware of the change if it could affect more than just one person. We want to make sure that we have that clearly posted.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Tiff, because we don't want people to use the written SOP forever. When they become good at the job, it's okay that they don't follow it. It's not a checklist, or it's not a flight where you have to check your engines, flaps, check your, it's not usually that critical. So we expect the SOPs to be used for training, and then it's okay to move away from them once they have memorized and it's being done well. So that's a really good point, is like when things are updated, we have to be able to convey that information back to the team, the new expectations, the new process, for them to follow and to add in or to take away from the way that they've been doing it up until now.
Yeah, and follow-up question, Dave, from a systems perspective, what down when a business treats SOPs as a one-time project rather than an ongoing system? What does that look like over time?
Yeah, you pretty much said it. These are nearly, if you're going to print them, they're nearly from the moment you print it, right? It's just kind of tongue in cheek, but it's what I would call perishable. Should be dynamic. They will change either from inside or from outside. And you explained a lot of it. If you're using different equipment, if you're using different products, someone comes up with a new way. So the idea of a static document that you get correct the first time or the first 2-3 iterations is highly unlikely in the first place. So that's the beauty of the whole thing, is like, we don't have to expect perfection because the documents are dynamic. We should always be learning, improving, creating new efficiencies. And those are sort of the internal learnings that we should be updating within the documents. And then outside, products, different equipment, different things happening in the store that affect our processes. But from a systems perspective, if we treat it as one and done, literally if changes, the whole system breaks, because people will not do SOPs that are incorrect, and they will expect all of them to be wrong if some of them wrong. So your whole system is predicated on keeping them fresh, keeping functional. Tiff said using communication to make sure people know when they're updated. And I'd heard the line once, I can't remember it goes, and I can't attribute who it comes from, but basically it is not about what you expect, it's about what you tolerate. So we might expect people to follow SOPs, but if we tolerate the idea that they're not, the system itself will break down. But this also we have to blame on ourselves, right? Because refreshing them, if we're not updated, if we're not presenting changes to our employees, we're teaching our employees that these things that we took time to write or asked them to participate in and write themselves we're just going to throw them and they're going to get stale. They're going to be useless. People will just not, they'll just not pay attention to them because we haven't treated them with sort of the interest and respect that they deserve. If we want our business to buy systems, we have to treat the systems properly and stay engaged with them and maintain them and keep them updated.
And you'll keep getting silly calls, shows, and it'll never stop, and you'll never be able to step outside your business and work on your business. So a simple checklist of putting all of this together, and you can work through this week, is identify one process causing the most inconsistency or problems right now. That can be your first SOP. And then sit with one who does it best and document what they do step by step. And again, you don't have to be there for the process of them documenting it. You can hand that off to them and be like, hey, give me a first rough draft of what you think this looks like when you do it. And then you can start working with AI and articulating clearer after that. So don't think you have to jump in every single person and just be like, hand it off to your team. Give them the responsibility and trust that they can handle that kind of task. Add the intent. Why does this matter and what goes wrong with it? So if you start building these with your team and you can start articulating, hey, if this is not done correctly, here's XYZ problem that could happen. Add photos or reference images to wherever a visual helps. So like I said, the bath and how you look after you're done. Run the draft by the person who will use it or just somebody that has fresh eyes. It doesn't have to necessarily be a new employee. But if they can read it from start to finish, perform the task, and not miss any steps, that's a good first start. Decide where it lives and make sure every relevant staff member knows where to find it. Make sure that it's clear, articulated, and relevant to the staff member and where it lives. And set reminders to review every so often. You could for quarterly, especially with some of the newer tasks that you're building, and you make sure that if you're hiring a lot, that this is constantly getting reviewed. But set some kind of cadence to reminder to review these.
There's two ways I look at triggers in order to do anything in a business. One would be an event-based trigger, and the other would be a trigger. And the time-based triggers are just this: is like, okay, the biannual review of documentation to make sure everything's up to snuff. An event-based trigger, which I kind of like, it depends so much on your situation, but the time-based trigger for SOPs to be the new hire. And Tiff talked about feedback loops earlier. And when we're developing these SOPs, the feedback loop is pretty obvious. We're giving it to a key employee. We're asking them about documenting a process. We want to make sure it's relevant to a novice or brand new employee who's not done the job before. But a really good time to review your training and SOPs is when you have a new trainee. And the reason valuable is you get real-time feedback from an absolute novice who's never seen the job before. And this is the opportunity to say, what did you get? What did you not understand? Could you explain it differently? Better? What are we missing from the information? Have our processes changed, but we didn't update the documentation? So hiring that often, right? Then time-based reviews are absolutely critical. But if, every once in a while, a couple of years, you have a new person in, a part-timer, someone that has to learn a few of the tasks, this is the absolute golden time to review your SOPs and your primary training processes. So I like both time-based triggers and event-based triggers that allow you to review these docs to make sure that they're fresh and useful.
Yeah, usually when the power goes out is a pretty strong trigger to make sure that document is completely updated. The goal is not to have a perfect SOP library. The goal is to have a living system that makes your store a little more consistent, a little less dependent on any one person, and a little easier to run every single time someone uses it. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, we're talking how to evaluate your systems. We're going to go over how we cut our warehouse receiving time down pretty much in half and the responsibilities, and just made that job just so much easier, because you could have money sitting inside your business in these systems and these SOPs that you have built that you can reduce and evaluate and create more efficiencies in and get that money or time back, whatever the case is. So thank you so much, Dave, for being here. And we'll talk to you guys next week.